Lisa Daftari is editor-in-chief of the Foreign Desk, an expert on Middle East affairs, and absolutely understands the Iranian movement, what's happened in terms of the anti-regime movement, and what's happening on the ground as we speak. Thank you so much for taking the time at the Media Line.
Thank you so much for all your hard work and thank you for having me.
Listen, Lisa, a lot has happened. It's 12-day war. Everyone is trying to understand what happened. And that's really the moment that we're in. It's where we have seen Israel enter a war to take out the Iranian nuclear capacity. It's a war where we have seen the Iranians retaliate on Israel, where President Trump and America entered the war, where President Trump determined there'll be a ceasefire. And at the moment, we are trying to understand and digest what does that ceasefire mean. So why don't we begin with that?
It's so much to unpack, but what I suggest people do is not look at this as a 12-day war, but look at it as 46 years in the building and moving forward because the regime is still in place. And that only means more of the same. From day one, this regime came in 1979 and decided that they wanted to export their brand of Shiite Islam. When people go crazy over ISIS, the Islamic State, I remind people the original Islamic State is actually Iran's regime. They came in, they took over a massive country with an actual military, actual police force, a sovereign nation, and made it an Islamic State with an agenda, Shiite Islam to be exported. And they did everything in their power, every dollar that they made, every ounce of energy that they had, they put into exporting this war or this agenda into the region and beyond into the world. So they created their terror proxies. They created Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then we see Hamas in Gaza, the West Bank. You see Palestinian Islamic Jihad that is supported by them. More recently, the Houthis in Yemen, insurgencies in Iraq and Syria, and of course their major presence in South America at the footrest of the United States, wanting to have access to our continent here. So this is a long time in the making. And what was their goal? Offense and defense. In terms of offense, to spread again their agenda, to go after Israel, their sworn enemy, to go after the United States, their other sworn enemy, the big Satan and the little Satan. And of course, defense, to keep this war, to keep their jihad off of Iranian soil. Fast forward to the 12 days we just saw. A lot of that has been destroyed. Israel, with its military capabilities, has diminished its major proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas. Now they brought the war to Iranian soil because of the existential threat that the Iran regime presents to Israel. So this is intel that has been gathered years and years and years. So is it a climax of the October 7th war? In some ways it is, but this is intel that has been curated by Israel because for Israel, the security and to make sure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon is a 24/7 job. And it's not something that ended with this 12-day war, although there were many achievements to be celebrated. A lot of progress was made. And of course, the most important part is that Israel, in collaboration with the United States, put the mullahs on warning. If this should happen again, if they should go forward again, we know that both Israel and the United States are on the same page. Zero tolerance for a nuclear weapon to be in the hands of the mullahs.
You bring up many good points, but I think the one that really stands out has to do with the accomplishments. And Iran right now is sitting, and they are not free totally of uranium because we feel and have heard from many that we have spoken to, it is possible, it is feasible that some of that might have been transported out of some of the nuclear plants. Everyone wants to understand this. Now, President Trump is pushing back very hard that that is not the case. He's saying that the satellite imagery that we are seeing is that of workers covering up the nuclear site. I think only time might tell. What do you think?
Right. It's very nuanced. Felice, you and I have been studying this and observing and reporting on this for many years, and it's very nuanced. Look, the campaign that we just saw, it didn't bring them down to zero. And we had said, even during the war, even before that, that any residual would probably mean that they would march forward. Because even if we killed their nuclear program or their enrichment, we didn't kill their motivation and their desire to have a nuclear weapon. For this regime, having a nuclear weapon is self-preservation. For this regime, it is defense, it is offense. It is to have this weapon is to stay in power, and that's exactly what they want. During this war, I had so many interviews, and I would repeat the same line. They are sadistic, not suicidal. They want to remain in power. And knowing that is very important for the Western world in moving forward. Felice, one of the most upsetting things, or just it's just disappointing to watch, is the pool of reporters that are attacking Pete Hegseth and attacking Donald Trump over the accomplishments of this campaign. Now, regardless of whether we took out 40%, 60%, 80%, so the United States got involved because this is a core national security issue for the United States. Now, where is the unity in that? Where is the rallying around the flag like we saw on September 11th? That's how far the mullahs campaign has progressed in the United States. These are the talking points of the mullahs right here in the media pool at the White House or at the Pentagon. And it is so crazy to watch. I'm not saying reporters have to be blind and close their eyes and say America is the best. That's not it at all. We are trained to push back. We are trained to ask the important questions. But to take the position of, we failed, we're the worst, this was in vain, we invaded a sovereign nation for no reason. It's so misled, and it just shows a misunderstanding of the facts on the ground. Regardless of what happens here on forward, I do appreciate the fact that Donald Trump understands that the Iran regime is a threat, not just for our ally. We're not doing this as a charity project for Israel, but for the United States. This is a military threat. It is a national security threat, and we will have to keep our eyes on the ball. Another thing I want to mention just before we move on from this specific topic about enrichment is that the pace at which the Iran regime was working before was at a snail's pace. Why? Because they wanted to stay under the radar. The fact that they set up 12 sites, the fact that they went underground, the fact that they had 13 feet concrete walls, all because they wanted to move slowly and undetected. Now that might not be the case. And that is something, again, for Israel and the United States to watch. Now, when the ceasefire was announced, that was my first reaction, that Israel, particularly Israel and the United States, but particularly Israel, because it's in their vicinity and they are at an arm's length reach of the mullahs, they should have the right to act if they perceive any threat is brewing or that the mullahs are continuing on with building a nuclear weapon.
Many people point to the fact that maybe the ceasefire was premature. Israel tends to end things too soon. The United States, in this case, had many things happening behind the scenes. There are always politics that enters into military operations. We all know that. But having said that, there are other factors here. There's the factor of, will somebody loan a nuclear uranium to the Iranian regime, and what's happening and unfolding on the ground in terms of the Iranian people themselves, which begs that question of how safe are the Iranian people.
A few things to break down here. Number one, one of the things that this campaign did, the 12 days did, was it completely completely destroyed the idea that Iran is backed by the axis of resistance. China and Russia did not come to its aid at all. Even Hezbollah, its own pet project that it gifted 150,000 missiles to, didn't come to its aid. Therefore, they're alone, they're isolated. This was a great opportunity to truly diminish, if not get rid of this regime. And that comes to my second point. Let's segue to the Iranian people. The Iranian people understood this, many of them. Look, many just, and let's start with, war is never an easy thing to digest and say, well, we're so happy that there's war on our soil and we're so happy that there are bombs coming down on us. No, that can't be. But there was a quote I heard and someone posted it on social media, and I thought it was so accurately and precisely conveyed what the Iranian people were feeling. They said, no, we're not celebrating war, but we are happy that the killers of our children are being killed. And that just really paints that very complex issue that the Iranian people have, looking to Israel, looking to Bibi, in many instances, protests that were thanking Bibi for coming to their aid. I actually happened to be in Paris when the war broke out for a couple of days, and there was a protest of pro pro-Pahlavi, which is the monarchy, which was the old Iranian flag, and pro-Israel protests. So these Iranians who are of moderate Muslim descent, holding the old Iranian flag with the lion and the sun, and holding Israeli flags in one in each hand, and praising Bibi for the attacks because they feel that by diminishing the regime's assets, nuclear and military, that they can come one step closer to regime change. Now, to your point about this being
But there have
premature,
been executions this week. There's fear
correct.
on the streets. This is a very serious problem right
So
now.
that's what happens when you wound the snake and you don't kill the snake. A wounded snake will now come back to bite the people, and that is exactly what we saw. So, with regards to this ceasefire, I have been saying all week NATO came too soon. NATO was a place where Donald Trump wanted to walk in, have closed the chapter on this war, not walk in as a war president, but walk in as a peace president. And because of the optics of that, he said, you know what, this is a great time. I can pressure Israel. I can pressure the Iran regime. I can get everyone on board to move forward with a ceasefire. Look, no one in this equation wanted an escalation. The Iran regime certainly didn't. They were getting their butts kicked. Israel didn't want an escalation, but they did want to finish a defensive campaign. And the United States certainly didn't want this to escalate. So with that being said, the United States caught everybody at a moment where everyone was pressured into a ceasefire. Now, does that mean that Israel's campaign was finished? No. Does that mean that we got them down to zero capabilities? No. But the Iran people, I would say the Iranian people felt as though had this continued further, they would have been in a better place or better positioned. During the 12 days, minimal access to internet, blackouts to keep the people off the streets. You and I both know the fear of the Iran regime, more than the United States, more than being fearful of Israel or its military, is fear that the Iranian people should rise up in a grassroots movement and to have a revolution.
I think that it was very interesting to watch what happened when you saw that the Iranians attacked the American bases, and that was orchestrated. And that says a
Agreed.
lot right there. So, having you weigh in on this and understanding the background from which it comes, what are the American people not getting when they looked at that whole scenario play out?
It's interesting to watch when you and I, people who have had a front row seat at all of this for decades, understand exactly what that was. A symbolic attack that was very much orchestrated. I mean, who sends a save the date for a military attack that's supposed to be in response of and retaliation for major attacks, right? So completely orchestrated. It was meant not to escalate, but to save face. The Qataris knew about it. America knew about it. Obviously, the Iran regime did not want it to be anything more than what it was, but then they go back to the people and they say, you know what, we showed them. And then today, the supreme leader, says we were victorious in this war. So, look, it was a nothing. But for some people who wanted to have the context, they said, well, look, they hit us. We hit them, therefore they hit us, and now we're even Steven. Let's move on with our lives. Not understanding that the DNA of this regime will not change, not after Israeli strikes, not after American strikes. And no one knows that better than the Iranian people who have suffered. And you know who else knows that? The moderate Arab world that surrounds Iran, the moderate Arab world that has grown closer to Israel and is waiting for the backlash from October 7th to die down so they can become signatory to the Abraham Accord, so they can become, have more prosperity and be part of a modern and moderate Middle East moving forward. So the one thing that is standing in everyone's way is this regime and its ability to sell oil, its ability to rake in money, its ability to put money into its proxies. And again, going forward, we have not solved any one of those problems. And I pray for the Iranian people who now have to live with a wounded snake.
It's deeply frustrating and very, very worrisome, and it's something to watch. I want to go back to something you said about the Abraham Accords, and many are asking, are we going to see that happen now? And I often say to them, not so fast. What do you say?
Soon enough, soon enough. I think a couple of things here. The Trump administration is very keen to get a win in the Middle East. They don't want to come out again looking like they promoted a war. They want to come out like they are the ones creating deals and good deals and deals that lead to peace and prosperity, which the Abraham Accords did. I was part of the rollout of the Abraham Accords in the first Trump administration. It was probably one of the most meaningful moments of my life to be on the White House lawn in the aftermath to watch the signing of the Abraham Accords, because you and I both know that that was such a myth buster for those who have covered the Middle East, to say, wow, we can work around the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We can move around these generations old tropes and animosities to have these deals. And I do think it's the way of the future. Whenever I am asked about the future of the Middle East, I am optimistic, despite all these wars, despite all the death and destruction that we've seen, especially in the last couple of years. I am optimistic that that is the way forward. Now, what I do think will happen is I think the Saudis are going to hold back for a while because it's too soon for them. They have to show some sort of solidarity with the Palestinians and the Arab world in that sense. But I do think we're going to have a few smaller countries sign on as a symbolic move forward, because there has to be a momentum for the Abraham Accords. And I do think that one day we will lead up to the Cyrus Accords, which is a deal between the Iranian people and the Israelis. Why not? They have more in common than anyone else in the Middle East. These are people who have had a long history of collaboration. They have had a history of friendship. And I think moving forward, there's no reason to stop that. We just have one obstacle in the way, and that obstacle is sitting in Tehran.
You said something on X. It appears Trump's rhetoric on Israel and Iran is a moving target, and perhaps strategically so, but these decisions reveal the actual playbook when it comes to deciphering his foreign policy. Watch what he says, watch what he does, not what he says. And there's a lot of messaging going on. President Trump loves to throw out the message. He's quite good at it.
Yes.
Day to day, looking at what's happening right now and trying to understand what he is thinking is really difficult for the American people. So I think, you mentioned the word unpack, which is so popular today. In
Yes.
unpacking some of the things that he has said and looking at particularly the last 12 days and watching the trajectory of his statements, where's he heading?
Let me quote someone smarter than myself for a moment. Newt Gingrich and I spoke at an event, and he gave a keynote before I did, and he said something so interesting. He said, I used to always criticize Donald Trump, and then I got to a point where I thought to my, then I realized if he says something, and I'm very loosely paraphrasing what he said, if Donald Trump says something that I don't understand, it's on me. I got to go home and think about it, because he's so smart that if, whatever he says, if you don't understand what he's saying, you got to go home and think about it. And I think that that was proven to us in this war. Look, I used to criticize Donald Trump for being too blunt, for saying everything up front. And in this war, he said 2 weeks. It was 2 hours when he got involved in the strikes. He kind of diverted everybody, including the Iran regime. Now, I think it's smart. We haven't seen this kind of political power play, from him, being using political warfare as a tool, using messaging as a tool, and I think it's helpful, because you're dealing with an enemy that is very much not straightforward. You can't deal with them in a sense of diplomacy. I think when people like myself were very much triggered when he said, "Oh my gosh, we're going to sit down with the Iran regime," and Bibi sitting right next to him in the Oval Office. We're going to have direct talks with Iran's regime, and everyone was like, "What?" He's the one who pulled out of the 2000 in 2018. He's the one who pulled out of the JCPOA, and he's the one who said it's a bad deal, and he said it's a waste of paper, and how would he get back into a deal? So I think that kind of attempt at diplomacy and then following it up with military action, I think it was a smart move to have all options on the table. You're dealing with a very an enemy that uses a lot of asymmetrical political warfare, and I think it's very smart to not put everything out there. And I think it's difficult because you have Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump. Regardless, the media, the foreign media, foreign leaders will dissect and just really just try to break apart everything that he says. And that for that reason I tweeted, watch his actions, not his words.
Many were concerned about mining the Straits of Hormuz. It didn't
Mhm.
happen.
Right.
Strategically, the Iranians probably thought this is suicidal. And the reality is that they still always have that in their little basket of tricks.
Right.
Right now, right now, the question is that where they are, because Ali Ayatollah Ali Khamenei came out today and he was his usual self of saying that we're going to attack Israel, America again, he would attack Israel again. He alluded to all these things. How far away are we from actually seeing that happen?
Well, what I loved about the thread about closing the Strait of Hormuz. First of all, I think the markets didn't really move much on oil prices, which I thought was very indicative of that threat being not a threat anymore. First of all. Second of all, my favorite reaction was by the Chinese leader who said, "Don't." That was his reaction. And that was the level of his engagement in this entire conflict was don't. And I really appreciated that because it kind of put into context again that the regime is so isolated that even their best friends who are about to buy oil, about to make them rich again, basically are giving them a slap on the wrist and saying, don't even think about escalating this war to that because you're going to be upsetting the global markets, and we're not about to sign on to that. I think it was incredibly powerful, and to my first point, they're not looking for suicide. They're not looking to escalate. They're looking to bluster. They're looking to appear strong, but at the same time have minimum consequences on themselves. With regards to the Israelis and hearing these threats, the United States hearing these threats, again, they're monitoring the situation. I don't think it's crazy because Felice, we live these like multiple realities in politics right now, and there's this social media, and then there's the battlefield, and then there's that it's like what happens at the podium and social media are now two different things also. So I would say let's focus less on the bluster, whether it's coming from Israel, United States, or Iran's regime, and focus more on the actions. What's really going on, and where are we going to go from here?
I need to bring up something sensitive, and it's about the Jewish community in Iran. And I don't feel they're safe based on what I'm hearing right now. What can be done? What is happening behind the scenes?
Yeah, this is something that always comes up. The Jewish community in Iran, they're sitting ducks, right? They know that themselves by living there. And I'm not saying that I'm not telling anyone where to live, but by living there, they know that they are at risk, and they will always be the first to be targeted, particularly in a war against Israel, right? So there have been reports that there have been home invasions, there have been arrests, they have been warned, they have been threatened. Again, nothing new for the Jewish community living inside Iran. And then every time this happens in every one of these uprisings or protests or wars, I always get that call, should we publicize this, or will there be further backlash for the Jews inside Iran? Will there be more consequences for them? And my position has always been, without further endangering them, meaning names, pictures, identification, any interviews with their faces or their identities, I will not do. But to talk about this issue as a whole, to underscore it, and to bring it to the attention of the so-called human rights advocates of the world, to bring it to the attention of places like Amnesty International and the United Nations that are just fraud, that if they truly care, that this should be brought to their attention, and we should see what they will do in that case. But look, nowadays we don't even need those associations. We have social media. It has a lot of negative side effects, but there's also a lot of positive and benefits that come with social media, that we are able to publicize these stories. We are able to create awareness around them. Look, just because of my reporting in social media and my appearances on Fox, I was able to get two pastors that were in jail in Iran solely because of their Christian faith. I was able to get them released because of the level of pressure and the attention that was brought to their cases. The regime felt that they, it wasn't worth their while anymore to have that kind of attention on these cases. So I do think that it's worthwhile, and I thank you for bringing up that. It is a very sensitive subject, but it is worthwhile to bring up, to talk about, and to publicize the cases of many religious and cultural minorities inside Iran. The Baha'is are another group. The Christians that are converts away from Islam, not the Christians that are born into Christianity, but we have a trend inside Iran to convert to Christianity, and to turn away from Islam is punishable by death, as many people know. But there's a huge home church movement, underground church movement inside Iran. Many people feeling that is their way to connect to God, and that there are consequences for it. So many people are under fire right now, whether it's the political dissidents, those who are against the regime, those who dare to organize against the regime, college students. How ironic, Felice, that they come here and they support and sponsor our college students to put up encampments that are pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah, anti-Israel on our college campuses, but their own college students don't have freedom of speech on their college campuses. So I wish the Western world would connect the dots and understand the irony in that and how we are being manipulated and how they are conducting their political warfare campaigns here on American soil. But we're ways away from them understanding all of this.
Well, Lisa, I wish you a lot of strength. There's a lot more to cover, a lot more coming up. And thank you so much for taking this time, editor in chief of the Foreign Desk, and great work you do. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Felice, to you, the Media Line, and all the work that you do on the front lines. We appreciate you and thank you for having me.
You're welcome.